Overpaying for anything sucks, especially socks, so why pay $45 for a single pair of grip socks when you can spend less than half? Pure Grip Socks Pro feature our best materials for optimal fit, moisture wicking, and performance at a fair price, just $16.99 a pair at puregripsocks.com.
10 years ago, Adidas launched this boot right here, the Adidas Predator LZ, a football boot that really changed the course for the Adidas Predator line, getting away from a leather upper for the first time ever and introducing the lethal zones concept, where you have all these rubber elements scattered across the upper, not just for power, which historically was what the Predator series was all about, but more so for the sake of an all-round boot, even more specifically a control boot to compete against Nike's, at the time, very successful CTR 360 line. Longtime Predator fans remember this as the football boot that destroyed the Predator series, which I can only assume Adidas is hoping everybody forgot about, given that the new Predator Edge takes huge inspiration from the original LZ, even including the original launch colorway, which nobody liked back then. I do think it looks a little bit better now, but you get my point. With that brief history lesson out of the way, what I intend on doing in this video is breaking down all the new technical details of the Predator Edge, which at the time of me recording this, unfortunately, I don't have the boots as of yet, but I'm expecting to have them very, very shortly. So look out for full reviews on the Edge Plus, the Edge.1, as well as the takedown models very, very soon. Make sure you're subscribed and hit that bell notification so you don't miss out on those reviews. So with all that said, here is the no marketing BS first look at the new Predator Edge. Now this goes without saying, but some people do get confused about this. The Predator Edge does replace the current Predator Freak. They are no longer going to be producing those whatsoever, but the lineup more or less stays the same, where you have your top price point of the Predator Edge Plus, which is the laceless model that retails for the same $275 as the Pred Freak Plus, and then you're going to have two variations of the laced model, which is the Predator Edge.1, the low cut as well as the mid cut, both retailing for the same $250. All of which you can get below their normal retail prices by way of some exclusive SR4U coupon codes by checking out the links down below. You've heard the saying, don't judge a book by its cover, but in the football boot industry, we go by judge the boots by the launch colorway and the way that it looks way too early on, and then maybe change your mind down the line. Nonetheless, I actually really like the look of the new Predator Edge, and as far as taking inspiration from the launch colorway of the Predator LZ, which I wasn't really a big fan of, I didn't think that was a great looking boot to begin with, I actually like the combination of blue and orange on this Predator Edge, and in general, especially the low cut one from the side profile, I think it's a pretty cool looking boot, and I'm very curious to see this in more colorways moving forward. Is it the best looking boot ever? No, but I kind of like the technical and sharp lines that it has, and in general, I'm not mad at what they've done. For me, it's a better looking boot than both the Pred Mutator and the Predator Freak. But let me know your opinions on that down in the comments. Now, regardless of whether you go for the Laceless Plus or the Lace.1 variation, the core of the upper remains the same, where it's a Flyknit base that looks pretty similar to the outgoing Predator Freak, but I'm told maybe has a little bit more thickness to it. But of course, the big thing here are the zone skin rubber elements spanning across pretty much the entire upper, where instead of individual demon spikes that you either loved or hate with the previous generation, it's kind of gone back to these longer fins, which I guess is a more traditional style of rubber striking element that we've seen on the Predator series. And again, if we're going to relate it back to a previous model, it's going to be most similar to what was originally introduced on the Predator LZ. Nonetheless, these are very aggressive and cover the entire foot. So in terms of coverage of that SL rubber material compared to the last couple generations of Predator, I think we have more here than we've ever had before. So what I'm expecting is a ton of additional grip on the ball. How that's going to translate to actual feel for the ball, the sensation that's really difficult to describe, you kind of just have to feel it, that remains to be seen, because I'm not sure how stiff these rubber elements are or how stiff that prime knit upper base is. And I think when you combine the two together, given that they're very long streaks of rubber without many breaks, it kind of leads me to believe that the upper is not going to flex and move as naturally with your foot as perhaps the demon skin concept allowed for on the previous generation. Just like every other line from Adidas, you have the option of going laceless or sticking with something more traditional in the laced 0.1 option. If you do opt for the Plus, you're going to notice that the laceless system has been redesigned from the previous generation Predator, where the elasticated prime knit across the top of the foot, which more or less looks to remain the same, is much more shallow in terms of how much of that elasticated material is exposed, which does kind of worry me a little bit because you're not going to get as much tension around your foot. If less of the upper is elasticated, you're just losing out on adjustability when sliding your foot inside of the boots. And it's also slightly off-centered, which I thought was kind of unusual. Nonetheless, it's difficult for me to judge the quality of the fit and the lockdown of the laceless system without actually having the boots on my feet. And of course, everyone's going to have a different experience. What I will say specifically about the laceless model is that it has a very angular shape. From the side profile, it almost looks like a triangle, and while I think that looks very cool, almost as like a concept football boot, in reality, I don't think many people's feet are actually shaped like that, and I'm not exactly expecting this upper to be overly pliable, so I'm a little bit concerned about the overall fit. What I do like is that the mid-cut collar is still mid-cut, but a lot less extreme than the Predator Freak, which had this unnecessarily long tail. And I also really like the V-cut across the front that makes the opening significantly larger, which means putting these on and taking them off should be a lot easier than what it has been over the last generation. Where the 0.1 models to me just look like they have a little bit of a better shape to them, and of course with the actual lacing system that runs what looks to be a little bit deeper than the previous generation 0.1 Predator models and slightly off-centered at the bottom, which is kind of unusual, you're gonna have that adjustability that you're just not going to get from the laceless Predator Edge Plus. Nonetheless, whether you go for the mid-cut or the low-cut model, the mid-cut model looks like it has a collar pretty similar to the laceless variation, so no surprises there. It's kind of just a preference, if anything, because there's no price difference between the mid and the low. Nike, take note of that. There's no reason why a Superfly should cost $25 more than a Vapor 14. Nonetheless, I really like the look of the low-cut one in particular, where they did some fancy stuff along the edges of the low-cut design that kind of make it look more technical, but it's basically just gonna be a low-cut boot, a little bit of an extension tail at the back. Which brings us to the base of these football boots, where I think they've done something very interesting, but they've also very cleverly left out a lot of critical information that leads me to believe that what they're actually telling us is very gimmicky, and the real effect of these technologies is going to be very minimal, to say the least. Nonetheless, it's called the facet frame, and as you can see, it's constructed out of plastic. It has this very cool geometric angular look to it, which I think looks fantastic. The stud pattern as a whole is pretty much the same layout we're used to seeing from the Adidas brand, maybe slightly more aggressive in terms of the shape of the studs when compared to the outgoing Predator Mutator, but I don't expect any gigantic differences in regards to overall traction and performance. However, they have implemented a weight in the forefoot, and you can see there's a little piece of what looks to be metal towards the tip of the toe, and they've done that for the sake of increasing where the weight is on your foot, so when you strike through the ball, theoretically, it should allow for a more powerful strike because of that little bit of additional weight. In a world where the emphasis on new football boots seems to be about getting lighter, it's very interesting for Adidas to add weight to this brand new Predator, but it's not exactly a new concept for them or for the Predator series. If we look back in their history, not so much on the Predator LZ, but going even further back, the last time we saw additional weight added to the forefoot was on the Predator Power Swerve, which had this little insert of kind of like a hollow tube that sat underneath your forefoot, filled with tungsten sand, which is this type of metal where this sand had the ability to kind of shift forward and backward through the swing of your leg when striking the ball for the sake of additional power. They then transitioned into something called a power spine, which we saw variations of on the Predator X and the Adi Power. The Adi Power really should have been the football boot they took inspiration for from this next Predator, but that was more so about stiffening the forefoot rather than adding weight. So they've actually gone back even further for this particular technology. However, unlike the times they included weights on the Absolute and the Power Swerve and stuff like that, they haven't actually said how much weight they've added to the forefoot, just that it's there and that it's going to make a difference. What difference it's actually going to make, Nobody really knows. I'm all for implementing these unique and interesting technologies on a pair of football boots, but I don't like the fact that they've left it very wide open as to what it's actually doing and how it's actually doing it. Tell me how much weight there is specifically, and tell me what you've learned in implementing that weight in terms of the difference that it's supposed to make. Even if you're telling me it's a 5% difference, and that 5% is something that most people are not going to experience, at least there's some kind of data backing what you're telling me. This to me is just kind of an empty promise that is very open-ended, and they're just hoping that people are gonna buy into the gimmick, which I'm not really a big fan of. They didn't do that with Predator weighted elements in the past. I'm not sure why they're doing it now. And there you have it, a quick rundown and first impressions of the new Predator Edge. Do you love it? Do you hate it? Are you considering them as your next boots? Why or why not? Leave it down below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.